Good morning, Vietnam. Here we are for the first video of 2025. Welcome to the future. The future is now. And as we're all no doubt aware, this is the time of year, as I discussed in my video Anxiety in the Metronome on presence, that so many people are trying to make a change in their life, including me, including probably you as well. And so this has got me thinking about exactly how that happens. What are the mechanics of change in the human being? And I think a very good place to start is with stories and the psyche. So it's always occurred to me that one of the key differences between humans and other animals is our ability to generate and follow storylines. And this does seem to be a unique attribute to us, and it is such a crucial part of the human condition and human experience that it's almost the only conceivable thing that can really be considered the psyche, right? The psyche, to some degree, is a series of storylines that we may be conscious or unconscious of, but nevertheless influenced by. And so it's fair to say then, I think, that storylines to some degree run our life, at least on the level of consciousness. And so now there is a capacity to break out of that, I think, potentially, which you can go back and watch my Anxiety in the Metronome video for more on that. But if we're operating within this paradigm, which I think most people are, it's germane to consider the degree to which one can influence one's fate by the way in which one manages their relationship with various storylines, right? And this is where I want to introduce the concept of the danger or peril of on-demand stories, as opposed to the way that stories were perhaps conventionally disseminated. So this relates also to my previous video on whether YouTube is turning back into TV. So in that video, I was talking about the idea that perhaps YouTube has, to a degree, some cultural heritage from television, and that it might be returning in some sense, or at least experimenting with the idea of becoming more like the way television was. But of course, television shows, even if they had a serialized story, they had the property of being intermittent and exclusively available until the release of, VHS and DVDs, when people could suddenly watch the entirety of a show, right? But until that point, maybe it was on for a half an hour or an hour-long episode on a Wednesday night, for example, and you would watch that episode, and then that was it, right? You went back to your life. So it was a storyline in time, right? It was like a little slice of a story from another universe, if you like, and then you would return to your life proper. And so this is where I want to establish this dichotomy, if you want. It's not really a dichotomy, but I'm going to try and illustrate what I mean to you here, that when you're watching a television show that is a fictional storyline of someone else's life or a set of characters' lives that are not directly involved in your own life, you are investing in a story that is not your own, okay? Now, the reason that this is ultimately a false dichotomy is because watching a story about someone else's life is still a very valuable introspective tool, right? So you can relate to protagonists or even antagonists, right? You can learn things about yourself via this method. And that's part of what makes stories so powerful. But the danger is that you are only really able to invest in a foreign storyline at the expense of the storyline, your investment in the storyline that is your own life, okay? So again, I'm not saying this is capital T true, all right? This is somewhat of a low resolution way of looking at it, but it's important because I think from this perspective, you can see what the actual peril is, okay? So what I'm reminded of sometimes, interestingly, like the way that this illusion plays out, people love to watch cooking shows, and cooking shows are fascinating because they are not nominally instructional. Like the cooking show is actually telling you how to do something in your own life. But in practice, 99% of people who are watching a cooking show at any given time are never going to cook what they see on the thing, right? They might even go, oh, that looks like a good idea or something. But you know, when you think about it, it's practically impossible to like have all the ingredients at hand and like turn the TV to your kitchen and then you just look at the show and like follow the show. So they'll say, oh, well, you've got the recipes at the end here, but it's interesting, like, well, what are you doing then when you're watching a cooking show? And in some sense, it's that you're passively investing in a storyline of someone doing something practical, but you're not doing something practical. You see that? So effectively, it's not to say that you're like wasting your time watching a cooking show. I recognize that it's entertaining and that it's cathartic, right? It can genuinely bring you like a degree of psychological satisfaction, which any human being is worthy of feeling. But the illusory nature of this satisfaction born of another human being's storyline can sort of amount to like empty calories where to make like a diet analogy, where you're sort of feeling the psychological satisfaction of having done something that you haven't done. And so your storyline is now halted, right? Your storyline kind of comes to a halt somewhat, and you actually start to disconnect from it and become less invested in it as you become more interested in what's going on, not just with a cooking show, but let's say like Game of Thrones or like Squid Game is going to be the next one that everybody's watching. And it's interesting because if you take this, like, if you look at it in this way, I hope you can start to see that this can actually start to inflict kind of insidious psychological damage on the individual, right? And it's made worse by the fact that it's on demand and you can watch as many of these as you want, because there's no upper limit on how much you can like divest yourself of your personal storyline at the expense of watching something else. Like Netflix, for example, right? You can watch 5 seasons of something, and that's one thing, like binge watching 5 seasons of something. Okay, maybe that's like 3 days or whatever that you spend in someone else's storyline. But then you can just keep going from like one to the next to the next. You can like use intoxication, for example, if you like have some wine or, you know, get drunk or get high, and then, you know, just you can like max out your passive comfort in a sense. You can like intoxicate yourself to the degree that you're no longer functioning, but you can also get the illusion of functionality by basically projecting or plugging into someone else's storyline. And you can just do this ad infinitum now. Like, it's something that you can just do forever. And again, this is like not necessarily all bad. Like, it's interesting when I hear people like when they watch One Piece, for example, which is an anime with like thousands of episodes. They become part of a fan culture, and some of them, I think, take a lot of inspiration from this. So again, I'm not trying to like demonize it, but I just want to like bring this to your attention because it's a tendency I've noticed, especially that like when someone's ambition is like somewhat free form, if it's not tied to a time and a place and to other people, I'll make a video like more in depth about that idea later. But you know, if you have a job, for example, it's tied to a time and a place and people, right? You have to go to a place normally at a particular time, and then you have to like be accountable to someone else. But if you're an artist, let's say, like you make music or you're, you know, a graphic artist or something, and you don't have this like time, place, person thing, which kind of like this kind of trifecta that makes your ambitions real and you like holdable to account of like those ambitions, then things like reality takes on this vague quality, if you like, where now suddenly you could do the thing now, or you could do it in an hour, or you could do it next week. That's how it starts to feel. And that's where I think it just starts to seem easier to get that instant gratification of importing foreign storylines into your life. And again, I would differentiate this from, you know, like let's take like religious or spiritual symbology. Those are also storylines, but they overlay over the top of your self story, right? So there's a cosmology. So if you like, you're still invested in your own storyline as a human being, but then you're adding textures via a contemporaneous cosmological storyline, and then they can kind of run in parallel. So this can have its own risks associated with it. This can still lead you to do terrible things to yourself and other people, but it implies still a momentum within the reality of your own making. In a sense, you are progressing your own storyline by chasing after God, or even just like money or whatever, or the love of your life, you know, these kinds of ideas. And this is just going to bring me to, I think, my final point, which is that this kind of textured, uniform movement of stories, kind of layer cake of your individual storyline, this allows you to be invested in what feels like just one story simultaneously. There are multiple running, but you're basically invested in one storyline, right? And this is kind of the other thing, is that we tend to not be able to disperse our investment in storyline that much, which is why people don't prescribe to different religions usually, and even religions where you can potentially worship different gods, like Hinduism. You have this idea of bhakti, which is, to my understanding, like a devotional singular focus on one god. And this happens with people when they watch Netflix or whatever. They'll usually be watching one show, and they'll watch it all the way through, and then they'll watch something else, right? So the fact that you don't really want to be invested in more than one story at a time tells you something about how the human mind processes stories. And that should give you a clue. You should get the alarm bells ringing. If you're at a stasis point in your life, like you feel like your own story is not progressing, and you're simultaneously really invested in some fictional storyline, like, I'm diagnosing for you here that that's part of the problem. If you're too invested in some other storyline than your own, it's like crippling your ability to be in the present with your own, right? And so you have to pay careful attention to that, especially if you're surrounded by people who do this and there's like a cultural pressure for you to keep up with a show, right? And I remember this, again, Game of Thrones comes to mind, Squid Game now, Breaking Bad. Every now and again, the culture or even the subculture that you're in, like maybe you're in a like gothic culture and there's some show like Wednesday or whatever, like something comes out, everyone is like, oh, everyone's seen it and everyone's talking about this show. You've got to be careful, like think carefully. Are you happy for your life to be consumed with that storyline, or do you have something else in mind, right? Because you will, in some sense, as a social being, become subsumed by that herd instinct if you're not careful, no matter how like free-minded or independent thinking you may believe yourself to be. Things like that, things like advertising, you are vulnerable to them. That's just the way that we are. So you have to control your environment very carefully. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up there. That's kind of, I hope it doesn't come across as fear-mongering. And I don't want to make it seem like YouTube or social media is any kind of exception to this. Like, on the contrary, or reading books even. But books have the same property. I think there's two main differences. Like, number one, you can't really read a book as passively, so there has to be an active engagement of imagination. There's like a plethora of faculties which are active in book reading, which makes it a little bit different. Audiobooks, I don't know, jury's out. But the other thing is that there are avid readers who probably have a similar relationship to like the way people like watch Netflix or whatever. But books do kind of have this same property of finality to them, where you tend to read a bit at a time, and it's taxing enough that you can't just probably read a book all day, every day for months if you're like depressed or something, right? So, but nevertheless, there are like risks associated with that and benefits. So yeah, okay, so that's the video. I hope you learned something. I'm definitely going to be going ham on YouTube this year. So if you enjoy these kind of ideas and you get something out of them, hit the like, hit the subscribe button. And thanks for watching. It really does mean a lot. And I send you my love. I'll see you next time.